Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast where writers sit around drinking tasty beverages to talk about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. There will be rants and raves and opinions that may not agree, but are lovingly delivered. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Your tour guides today are John Schmidt and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 196, interview with Angie Elita Newell. Welcome, Angie.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I am so delighted that your team reached out to us. First of all, you wrote about an interesting book, and we have not introduced or talked to anybody of Native American bloodline or on Native American topics. So first of all, I had to look up so many interesting things, like, did I pronounce Lidley Q First Nations correct?
Yeah, we were discussing that earlier. Why so many eyes?
It's fascinating, but so you're a Canadian Native American. So
Yeah,
I
so
presume that the Canadian-American border falls right in the middle of somebody's land, right?
yeah, so I'm from the Northwest Territories, so that's like the far north, so that's the subarctic tundra, and we're directly related to the Navajo, and we share the same linguistic group, the Dene. And back in 2006, they actually worked on like the public education system between our nation and the Navajo Nation. They totally like revamped it so that it was, it aligned with like Dene stories and Dene language. So it's pretty interesting. And I had the opportunity to go down to the Navajo area last year, and it was spectacular.
Yeah, that is so cool. I mean, there are people, and fortunately, many of them in other countries, who may not realize America has been populated for the past 5,000, 8,000 years, long before the Vikings showed up, before the British showed up, before everybody showed up. And there's a lot of really fascinating lands, who owns what, territorial areas, linguistic differences. The Navajo speakers, at least, are starting to get a little bit the I'm going to say it wrong, the trade talkers, the wind talkers. Was it the wind talkers?
Oh yeah, World War II.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, so that's the same language that we have. So it's all Dene, and I'm from the South Slavey. There's like 7 different groups up in the Northwest Territories. And what's interesting about where I'm from, we're the only Indigenous people to North America that weren't forcibly relocated. So that's,
wow.
kind of like the central theme of my novel is, the big point of contention is that, they made all these treaties with these groups and they broke them all.
Well, they would have broken them with you, but you're in the Northwest Territory. It's hard to get there to break the treaty.
It's true. It's just too cold. They just they're like, you know what? You can just have it.
And you brought up your book that we're going to talk about a lot today is called All I See Is Violence. And there were things that I never quite realized about my own history. I had the very good luck to have an 8th grade teacher. Somewhere there's Mr. Keeley, who was also the basketball coach, who gave my version of American history, started with kind of the Trail of Tears. Bighorn, we got the Sand Creek Massacre, Wounded Knee, and ending with Japanese internment camps. So my whole 8th grade year was dedicated to shameful America. And
That's
yet,
a big year.
it was a big, heavy year, but it was awesome because when I got off to high school, I lived in a different area in Colorado. And my history teacher up there, we'll just say, had a different slanted view of manifest destiny. And I love that you brought about that in your book, because, I mean, this was a high school whose, I'm just saying, our alma mater went to the tune of Deutschland über alles. But it just, that opening of, even across America, there are so many different areas where teachers in social studies and history, some of them actually do care enough to learn this stuff. So and I love your book because this is a really neat book. Now, you wrote it from 3 different points of view, and it's in 2 different time periods, and that's what's cool. So tell us a little bit about how you picked Little Wolf and then her descendant, Nancy. I mean, I kind of was hoping all the way through it that, tell me Nancy Swift Fox is her descendant. And then she met a Swift Fox, and I'm like, yes, they're related. Fantastic.
I was So it originally started was I was at a Musqueam feast and I sat down next to this elder who was Cheyenne, and he just turned and he looked at me and he said, there were women warriors. And I was in my undergraduate years at university at this point in time, studying to become a historian. And I had never come across anything like that. So I just as a historian, I feel like you kind of pick up like certain things just kind of pique your interest and you put it into like the archive of your mind. And so I went into the archives and I did start researching this, and I did find that it would appear to be that at least 50% of these sort of plains nations, the Comanche, the to a certain degree, the Apache, we have the Cheyenne, the Sioux. Yeah, there was a strong like women warrior presence. So I started just kind of like mulling that over. And then I read George Armstrong Custer's memoirs, and I was like, whoa, what a narcissist. And I was like really intrigued by that. So I started, and he wrote all sorts of stuff. Like he fancied himself like an A-list celebrity back in, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution there.
If,
So I
if you
start
had Twitter, we know exactly what he would have been like. Just saying.
And so
Golden curls, boy.
Golden curls.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what an extraordinary person. Even like the word, like a lot of like the American terms like manifest destiny. I mean, like you couldn't think of like anything like more grandiose to sort of like encapsulate like a movement. Like it's so amazing as a writer. Like you're just like, whoa, what is this? Like it just, and as a Canadian and as an Indigenous person, like it really, really fascinated me. So I started looking at this and I was really inspired by the Never Ending Story, the movie, the like kids
Yeah.
movie from the 80s.
We love that movie.
Okay, that movie's amazing. Where he's like riding the dragon. You know how like at the beginning you have him like and the grandpa like talking and they kind of like go into the story. So that's where that like Nancy to me was sort of like them. And then, we go into like the story of Little Wolf. And I had to have Custer in there because I had a hard time juxtapositioning like all the facts I wanted to articulate through the novel. Because like I am a mother, and for me it was like, how do I engage my kids into history and make it in like a fun sort of dynamic way? Because a lot of nonfiction is pretty dry.
It is. This was actually an argument I was just having with my mother-in-law, God bless her, an amazing woman, of saying that you have all of this knowledge, maybe writing stories to make it accessible would mean that 1,000 people read it instead of the 24 assigned in the class. And
Yeah, exactly.
that is the power of novels. And the thing that I've loved is you remind people of something that Mr. Keeley taught me and I had forgotten until I got to the end of your book, that Custer was clubbed to death by a chick.
I mean,
Historic
how
fact.
that?
How
Like, here
awesome
this,
is that?
yeah, this Civil War hero. Like, he was an amazing warrior, Custer. And to go down, like, it's like a Shakespearean tragedy when you look into Custer's life. Like, his whole family was there. Like, and so when I started, it was just too fantastic. I could not write about it.
I loved that. And I loved the thread through it. I've sometimes, when people bop through time back and forth, I have not always followed it perfectly. You made it very easy to follow. You were one of those things I really liked about it is when you have your jumping backward in time or jumping forward in time, you very quickly set the reader in where you are, what it smells like, what it looks like. You engage the senses. You're put in, okay, we're waking up. We are back in the teepee, fondling the fur. and I just thought that was actually very skillful. And I wanted to say that out loud because as you move through the 70s, all the way back to the, 100 years earlier, basically, it made it very easy.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And then another reason why I chose like to have the 1970s juxtapositioned against, this point in time, like 1876, is I wanted to show that these issues that were going on, 100, 200 years ago are still resonating today. Like they're not fully resolved.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's things that I'd never thought about that Custer kind of helped discover and push the gold rush, the Black Hills Gold Rush. And so that he was responsible for why did they want to mush them off their lands? Well, they wanted to, use it for natural resources and not pay rent and get people out of their way. But you also did something that I've appreciated that some of the memoirists have brought together of history is people not behaving well.
Those are the best stories though, right? We don't want to read too much like Laura Ingalls Wilder. Like it has its place, but
There's the weaponized nostalgia is a big deal, and it's happened in Hollywood. It happens on TV for years. I mean, when you have the whole cowboys and Indians motif was one, first of all, John has a whole novel he's writing on how cowboys weren't white guys. What do you mean?
Oh
for
God,
sure.
please. And talking about weaponized nostalgia, Laura Ingalls Wilde was weaponized nostalgia herself.
Yes, she was. And so the fact that you brought it up that yes, women were warriors. Yes, women were involved in making decisions and just as high as up as anyone else making decisions. And men have been behaving badly throughout history. That I'm sorry, this is a trigger, but women have been raping natives and slaves and anybody that they think couldn't fight back since the dawn of having somebody that wasn't as strong as you.
Could I check that comment?
Yeah,
Did you mean to say women have been raping people?
no, men have been raping women and,
Okay.
and
You-
men, let's be fair.
no,
children.
that I'm okay with, but you actually said women have been raping people.
Women, it was thank you. That was two sentences that were connected badly in my head.
They got conjoined. And the thing is, and it's a question I actually have for our dear author here. History is written by the society that claims scholarship rights, even more so than the victor tells the story. The people that own the book repositories just quietly shuffle away the books that, well, just the fact that I'm saying books indicates that the people with the industrial base get to have their stories told. Not all the stories are lost, but uncovering them becomes very interesting. And a case down here in California is that a historian went and looked at the local First Nation population and found stories of the Donner Party from the other side, which, to distill them down to their quickest essence, was those stupid fools were shooting at us. Stop giving them food. And when you look at the historical record, it backs it up. Did you, and I apologize, I did not fully read the book. Did you delve into any knowledge that way? Did you find?
Yeah, I tried to, well, I'm an Indigenous woman. I'm 40 years old. So like I have my own thoughts on it. And, I wanted to write, like you said, like you read so many of these sort of, weaponized nostalgia. There's a romanticized version of an Indigenous person. I wanted to make it, like how I thought it would actually be, like an honest portrayal of my truth and my ancestors' truth. And what I found with that is that it was really hard to get it published. So I when going through like the submission process, like people are like, "Oh, this is amazing, but we can't publish it like this."
Interesting.
Yeah. And so then you're greeted with a bunch of questions as an artist. You're like, well, what what do I want to get out of this? And ultimately, like my message was purposeful. It was honoring my ancestors, and I wasn't going to change the story. So once, you kind of get into that, it made the journey a little bit longer and more complicated, trying to find someone whose values aligned with mine.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can hear that entirely. And that's a big piece of it, of saying how do you find a story a home, especially if it's not what people expect. Like you went through Greenleaf Book Group Press, right?
Yeah, I did. And they were amazing. And so like form wise, I was really inspired by modern literature. So Hemingway and World War I poets like T.S. Eliot and Wilfred Owen. And so, they took some really sensitive subjects, and they just like breathe so much life into it, in a really humanitarian sort of way. And so I wanted to do the same thing with this tragedy, because they handled their tragedies in such, it's in such an artistic manner that you can, you're more compassionate and, understanding to what happened. So I wanted to have that sort of journey with this.
You answered the question of the why, not just the what. And I think that is key to really good storytelling, because there are history teachers boring children across the planet with, and this battle happened at this war, and this battle happened at this war, and then people moved here, and then they did this thing. And if you don't have why, nobody's going to remember it. But you added why. You added, this is what gold meant. This is why they were relocating people. This is what had gone on before. These were individual persons' prejudices who'd come, and you packed it so full of why that, and it's the highest compliment I can give, of you made me go look things up. And that's so cool.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, thank you. I worked with the editor, Elizabeth Brown, and she came out of Harvard. And the same thing, she's like, I didn't know half of this. Like, I actually had to go research this because I could not believe that that's what happened to the women from the Battle of Washita, that, the American military sort of imprisoned them and raped them repetitively. Like, it's so horrifying. You can't believe it actually happened. And to like write about it, it's like, no, that's not just my like weird subconscious, like that actually happened.
If one more person puts out one more meme on the topic of, let's go back to a more polite time, I'm just going to bite them. when that's more polite. Yeah. And to a certain extent, I don't know if it happens to you guys up in Canada so much, but in America, we have the idealized noble soldier. We've canonized them all, such that anyone who's ever been a soldier, and how dare you speak ill of our troops, and how dare you, like, oh, honey, after Vietnam, I would have thought that illusion was gone.
Well, my mom was actually an Air Force pilot. So I come from, a military Army family, and they're complicated people.
They are. I come from a line of officers my own self, and their view of, they call it the conscript troops, is worst ever. The minute we had the draft, they're like, oh God, no, let's never have a draft again. Because if you force somebody to do something they don't want somewhere, you either get David Drake or a monster.
Yeah. What's interesting, like we're talking about the wind talkers, like within the Indigenous community in both Canada and the United States, like we have a heavy like history of armed forces. And that's like a real point of honor. Like, and so that's where I kind of tied Timothy into the Vietnam War. Like these people were volunteering when everyone else was being conscripted.
Yeah. Yeah. I also liked, there's a lot of it. You say the 70s wasn't technically that long ago, except for suddenly it is that long ago and I'm old. But I was a child of the 70s, and I did not know about some of what was going on with the Occupy Black Rock and Occupy Wounded Knee. And
yeah, that was so intense, like the American Indian movement. And so that kind of gets tied in with the Black Civil Rights movement. And it was pure chaos, right? They're occupying Alcatraz. They occupied the whole Indian Affairs office in Washington. Like it got pretty violent. And so what's fascinating is that the Pine Ridge Reservation, Wounded Knee, and the Battle of Little Bighorn, they're all in the same spot. Like that's amazing. Like that place is cursed.
Well, for me, it was you glossed over it lightly, but the number of state-sponsored murders of movements of all of these causes can make you sad. They can.
For sure, but like the sort of oppression that goes on against us is going on worldwide. So it's not just, unfortunately, it's not just limited to the Indigenous Americans.
No, it is not. No, the challenges with we have a whole couple episodes we've done on colonialism and the problems thereby. So suffice it to say that we all hope Indiana Jones breaks into the British Museum to repatriate things that he can take back to their countries where they belong, but probably not.
Yeah, that's quite a sensitive subject, isn't it? I've been working on a book about Geronimo, and it's like, well, where is Magnus Colorado's head? Why did they steal it? And please just give it back.
I also thought it was interesting, and this one is a deeper one. The theme is a feeling of identity. What is a loss of identity? What is persisted with identity? And what does it mean to feel like your identity is taken away from you while still feeling like, hey, you had one? I mean, I'm a white girl mutt. My father was found on a park bench. Do I have an identity? Well, Californian, but
I mean, it's pretty amazing when you start getting it. Like race is an invented concept that sort of started, towards the end of the 19th century. So, these people wouldn't have had that sort of like perceptual concept of themselves. So without that, when you eliminate that, like my ancestors, like they knew and they fought for, like we're all one universal energy. Like if you harm another, like you harm yourself, but then you're met with manifest destiny that was so violent that they had to choose, like, what do we do? Do we just surrender? Do we die? Do we try to fight for, this land that we've been on for thousands of years? Like what choice do we have left? And to that sort of conundrum as a historian, when you're reading that, I was like, wow, like you really need to humanize that, because when you start just going through it as a historian and how it's taught, it like it's exactly like you said. It's like, and then there was this battle, and then there was this battle. It's like, well, what does that mean? What's the impact, and what's the continuous like traumatic imprinting of that impact? As I mentioned, like all these issues that I met and I talked about in this novel, like they're still going on today.
As a science fiction geek, I did not know that the Klingon "Today is a good day to die" arose from Native American beginnings.
Oh, no way. Yeah, that's you. And so that was, like,
Oh my God, how did you not know that?
I did not know that, John.
I mean,
Thank you, Angie.
I
You
never
taught me
thought
something.
about it until you pointed it out.
Well,
I
that
mean,
was the
that's
question. Did you know
amazing.
that the Klingons borrowed it?
Or maybe one of them had like an interracial marriage at some point, and those CU values sort of like trickled in.
I loved there was a quote that I went, because when I went and started digging in, it came up in your novel. So that threw me right back into research. You kind of like, wait, that's Klingon, isn't it? And then I ran into it, and I loved something. If I can read it, it says, "We should be ready to die on any given day. We should always be prepared to die and have no regrets. That's why it's important to begin each day fresh and not let past problems or present distractions cloud how the world wants us to live."
Yeah,
And
it's that presence, right? The awareness. And so like that was like the spirituality was so ingrained into my ancestors that, Christianity and the way that that was structured at that point in time didn't resonate with them. And so you have this it's like two opposing forces meeting. And so you have this mass relocation and then the breakdown of indigenous societal structures through the residential schools, or in the United States, you call them boarding schools. And so this is just sort of like the beginning of that, right? Where like we're ripping them off their land so we can take the natural resources, and then we're going to try to, we can't kill them, so we're just going to try to culturally destroy them.
We can't publicly kill them, although, this
Well,
also,
they tried to publicly kill them, but they just couldn't kill us all.
well,
Yeah.
and the thing is, the history stretches back to the Spanish and California, of course. If you ever survive a California fourth grade, you build a mission. And I went to a mission school. I went to University of Santa Clara, and without getting too deep into it, if you visit the graveyard there, you realize that as a mission school, it had a lot of the same problems as a basic residence school.
yeah,
And in the area I'm in, Silicon Valley, they call it now Valley of Heart's Delight, there is a very deep lost, and I prefer the term First Nations. I think the Canadians have it right. History of the people who lived here before the Russians got to the north and the Spanish got to the south. And the funny thing was this valley we live in was the most heavily populated valley before the diseases swept in.
I
And
thought
after that, society collapsed.
and there was
Oh,
two
for
different
sure. Like
ways.
the death rate of, like the modern cold and flu, because we weren't exposed to those things. Like it's 90%. Like it reached where I'm from in the Northwest Territories quite a bit later, because we weren't met with colonization until quite a bit later. So like there were still people alive that from the 1920s and 30s that remember like whole villages were wiped out.
And some of it was how they approached it too. I mean, the Canadians had their way, they're Canadian and North American. We did oh yes, we have schools and missions. The mission is more the Spanish way. I thought it was interesting the way the Portuguese did it in Brazil in the Catholic Spanish way was we create missions in schools and we force all the children to learn how to be Spanish. And in Brazil, they had an interesting thing that said it was absolutely forbidden to teach natives anything about how to read or write Portuguese or, the Latin languages. So one way or another, it was how do I erase a culture in their own way?
For
So
sure. So like so for me, like the 1970s, like Nancy Swift Fox, like to get there, her people would have gone through that. So to me, it's like, well, like my Air Force pilot mother also went through the residential school system. So like I firsthand have heard the horrors that went on there, but yet here I am. I'm still an Indigenous woman. I still have these values. Like they weren't able to take them from us. So that's where we kind of go back full circle to like the cultural identity and what does that mean and how, and this isn't my story. Like this is everyone's story. Like if you're, this is all our history. It's not just limited to us. So again, how do you humanize this and how do you make it interesting? Like as a mother, like I look at my kids who like Pokemon and different, like how do you engage them?
you also brought up something that at least here in America, we are deeply in love with, throwing people in jail one way or the other. Because you had a character who was married to somebody that was in jail, you had an interesting point of how many women in America are trying to raise children and deal with the whole incarcerated spouse when we've incarcerated 9% of our population. And I mean, they had sex before they went in, many of them. So as we figure out how we see that, the women needing help and how they've changed that narrative, that's an important thing that you don't underline it and you don't throw it in people's faces, but it's real. How do you make ends meet? And how have women who have been single mothers throughout history have worked and found a way to make ends meet? And there's just for the feminism of it, I kind of felt like in my own white girl way, I had a little connection to Nancy Swift Fost and Little Wolf.
I
Also,
mean,
I
that's
would happily
amazing.
club
Unfortunately, like
people.
in like Indigenous people, like we're overrepresented in like every negative category, and incarceration is one of them.
Yep.
So, so again, that was just sort of like observing my community. I was like, "Ooh, like I'm a single mother as well." So it's like, well, you find a way.
Well, I'm on the chick side. I was aware when it went out and said, hey, have we talked about how violence against Native American women have gone largely unreported? And this is just men behaving badly on and off reservations, because who do you tell?
Exactly. And so it's, and you can't really change something unless you kind of bring light to it. And
That's
so that's
that's
like
why this is
something,
important. Yes.
yeah. Yeah, that's like I visit a shaman, and that's sort of like that's like what soul retrieval is, right? You can't really like bring your whole soul back until you acknowledge the shadows of your own soul. So it's acknowledging the shadows of the past, but it's hopefully, we can look at this and we can go, wow, maybe we shouldn't do this anymore.
Yeah, and that's why I think that all of these stories, and it's not the center of your story, it's just a piece of it, but to just drop it casually that, yeah, this happens, so that it becomes part of the narrative. It becomes, yet another bit of the story. And that's why out there, this is for people listening, your stories matter. The things you look about that matters, the story of your families matter, that if everybody dug into their own history of their own family, somewhere in there, you got a black sheep. I'm sorry, you do. It's-
Except
and
for
if
maybe
they
that
say,
Laura Ingalls Wilder.
I'm just saying that we don't know anything about Mary Ingalls' cousins or any of and
I mean, those books are amazing. I remember reading them when I was little, and what always stuck with me was the maple syrup. And
yeah.
it's been my lifelong dream to go find these magical maple syrup trees. I
You're
haven't
gonna
gotten there
need to
yet,
go
but it's
over.
on my bucket list.
Okay, it's Ontario, and it's right near Letterkenny. I'm sorry, not Letterkenny. What's the real name of Letterkenny? I forget.
You asked the right person, though. Jeannie would know.
Listowel, Ontario has so many maple trees and so many Mennonite farms that are selling the syrup by the side of the road that you can get any color you want. I'm just telling you, go visit the capital, go south from Toronto, visit Guelph, and head out towards Listowel, and you will find that beautiful maple syrup.
Yeah,
I lived there. I lived
I've
there
never
for a year. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's been a dream of mine. And like I'm in Canada, but I never go to Eastern Canada. It seems so far away.
Well, it's not even very close on the map. Canada's really big. It's
Canada's
huge.
really large. There's a song called that.
There is. Canada's really big. It's arrogant worms, I think.
Arrogant Worms.
All right. This is because you have been a teacher and a reader, and you have degrees in English literature and creative writing. You've clearly written at least 1,000 papers or more, and essays and stories. Is this your first novel?
This is we discussed this earlier. This is my first novel that I deemed publishable. So I've been writing for years. It's something I started doing when my daughters were infants, because you have a lot of time on your hands. It's interesting though, as a mother, like you have a lot of time with babies, but you also don't have any time. So you have so much time to think, and I always joked around like some people knit and I ended up writing. And so I started off with nonfiction writing, and then, a decade ago, I just like got into fiction writing, and I just really enjoyed it. And so I wrote 2 novels before this that were okay. Like I think like anyone who writes like a first novel, I think like I don't know if anyone's ever written a first novel that was like, you're like, whoa, that was spectacular. Like, you go back and you kind of look through it and you're like, oh yeah, there's some mistakes in there.
Well, things that made perfect sense to us when we first wrote it, 5 years ago, you can go back and, oh, Jeannie. Oh, okay, we can fix this. But
And so then I got going with this, and I was interested in making a documentary originally about this. So I was talking to a screenplay writer, Leslie Milner. He wrote for The Simpsons at one point, but I just told him what story I was working on, and he was just like, whoa, that's good. And so I started, I was kind of halfway through it at that point. When I finished it, I was like, yeah, that's pretty good. And so I got the another historian to look through it, Dr. Robert Mallet. And he's like, no, that's pretty amazing. And so, to kind of, like my journey as a writer is to just keep on writing. don't just go off on like your first book and think like this is it. Like just keep going. Like finish that book and start another book.
that is a surprisingly consistent advice that we've started hearing from people. just keep writing. We promise it gets better.
Yeah, it gets better and better. And for me too, like I write out everything by hand. So I first do because I am trained as a historian, and I have written, like I like to write historical fiction. I write it out almost like I'm doing like a master's thesis. Like I do archival research, and I take as much time as I feel I need on that to gather all my facts. And then I kind of make like a map of which facts I want to include, and the what and the why, essentially, and like how that pertains to my characters. And then like I just start dreaming about the story around that.
The what and why is magic, and I hope more people that are writing historical fiction delve into that, because you can keep to names, dates, places, etc. You can keep to all that is real and make it living. And I think it helps kids, and the more kids reconnect with the past, the more they are more compassionate and kind going into the future, I think.
Oh, definitely. I would be a totally different person without my historical knowledge. Like it gives you a sort of a compassion, worldliness when you hear things, even like we were talking about, like, well, yeah, this is terrible what's happened to us, but this has kind of gone on everywhere. Like you can look at it from, a point of awareness without
Well,
getting caught up in the drama of hate.
what are you working on now then? Is there
Yeah, I'm working on Geronimo, and he
Geronimo.
fought with the medicine woman Lozin, and Lozin was sort of eradicated from history. And here's this beautiful woman who had these amazing capabilities that really needs to be told.
Awesome. Well, at the time of this recording, and I hardly ever do this, we are recording this on January 16th. This is your book launch day. So congratulations. Your baby is born across the world.
Oh, it was a struggle. No, I'm just kidding. It was great. It came out easily.
I want you have to send me a picture. Who did your beautiful cover art?
Oh yeah, Newell, the graphic artist Newell. And so I was telling you earlier that, they were like, oh, Neil's gonna do your cover. And they were like, do you have any suggestions for Neil? I was like, oh, do I ever? I wanted something that looked like the American punk
Book. So congratulations and well done you.
Oh, thank you so much.
We will put links to the fascinating things we discussed during this episode on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. Thank you so much for visiting with us today, Angie. This was magnificent.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Coffee is my favorite drink, so you had me at the title.
Well, perfect. And All I Can See Is Violence is available out now. We will have links to all of the places you can buy it. And I really do recommend it. If you know nothing about Native American history, dink your toes in and learn about how a chick clubbed Custer to the ground, and you will cheer.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web magic is cast by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spiders are David Welsh and John Schmidt. Our intro and exit music is performed by Michael Ingberg. You can hear more from Michael at manyhutsmusic.com. Our podcast sponsors are Jackal Designs, The Bean Scene, Arm Street, an homage to wherever you enjoy your tasty beverages. And hey, thanks for listening.